after the very successful Prophet-5, Sequential released a number of other polyphonic analog synths in the early to mid 80s, all of which never lived up to the success of the original Prophet-5. The question I have, is it because they were not as good as the Prophet-5, or is it because taste changed and they were forgotten and there's a number of hidden gems left for us to discover? Let's talk about the Prophet-600. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're talking about the Sequential Prophet-600 and its place in Sequential's history and whether or not it's still worth it. Is it a good investment today? You can find these for anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 on the vintage used market, which is a lot cheaper than a vintage Prophet-5 or even a new Prophet-5. And let's talk about what it is, the history, and is it comparable to an actual Prophet-5. So the Prophet-600 came out shortly after the Prophet-5 in 1982. It was one of the first, I think, 2 synthesizers with MIDI factory installed, because Dave Smith had been involved in the design and creation of MIDI with Roland, and it was the Prophet-600 and I think the Jupiter 6 from Roland that they connected at a NAMM show. And the 600 was a budget version of the Prophet-5. Apparently at the time Sequential was having cash flow issues, and so they were looking at ways to give more for less, and the Prophet-600 was their solution. So it has got a very mixed reputation. So, and it's interesting because as I've been reading through the forums and reading through kind of everything I can get my hands on online, watching a couple videos, Starsky Carr just did a couple of really great videos on this. So he might have said all this already, but from what I could find, it wasn't actually because this sounds bad, but there was a few, I think one in particular review that really panned it hard, that gave it this reputation for being not as good as a Prophet-5. It definitely sounds different than a Prophet-5. It has, I think, the same VCO chip, the SEM chip, but it has a different filter chip and it has a different VCA chip than the Prophet-5. I believe it has like the 3372 and the 3360 for the filter and VCA, whereas the Prophet-5 Rev 3 had different chips in those those parts. So it has a different sound to it for sure, but it definitely has the Prophet-5 sound in a sense. It's different, but it's not as different as some polysynths that have came out after this, like the Pro 8, which we're going to do I think they call it something else. There's a Japanese version called Pro 8, and then there was the American version called I forget, but that's the one we're going to do in a follow-up video. But it definitely sounds closer to the Prophet-5 than the later sequential polysynths. And really, you are getting a couple of things that you don't have on a Prophet-5. You get a sequencer, you get an arpeggiator, you get MIDI, you get more patch storage, but you're missing some stuff. So what you end up missing is you miss, and the big one to me, you're missing on the polymod section, you're missing pulse width polymod. You're also missing the ability to put oscillator B into low frequency mode. And on the LFO, you cannot select multiple wave shapes for the LFO, which I think is a big deal. That's part of, you can get some really crazy sounds in the original Prophet-5 by mixing wave shapes on the LFO and sending this into low frequency mode. So you do miss out on some kind of fun weirdness that the original Prophet-5 could do with its kind of modulation capabilities. Other than that, you also end up with less, the notorious part about this synth was that it overtaxed the CPU. It was like a Z80, and with the additional things in that it did, it really was overdoing it on the CPU, and so you get not a lot of parameter resolution, and you get sluggish response when you change different parameters on the synth. To be honest, it doesn't bother me a ton when I'm playing and on the fly. I think if you were to get into real granular, trying to really dial in a sound, it would probably be very annoying. But there is a mod, the Glee mod, that adds a couple of different features and fixes the resolution problem. And people swear by it. This one is not modded out. But when I read through what it does, to me, the magic of this is still accessible even without the Glee mod. I don't think it unlocks a ton more. There are things that people say, hey, this really does it for me. But if you read through what it does, it's not the end-all, be-all, I think. I think the original is still pretty fantastic. Other things that are interesting about it, the keyboard is terrible. It's really bad keyboard, and there is replacements apparently, but it feels incredibly brittle and cheap. And I've seen a lot of people break, apparently that's common for you to break the keys because it does not feel like a very robust keyboard that is in here. I'm not sure what the specs are on it, but yes, it feels cheap. It definitely is not as sexy as a Prophet-5. They definitely were trying to save on components and save where they could with the cash flow issues that they were having at the time. But I think it gives you, the Prophet-5, a very similar sound. It's a lot of fun. So let's take a listen and we'll conclude with some final thoughts. So there you have it, the Prophet-600. I think the biggest thing that I miss on it from the Prophet-5 is the LFO. I think, the envelopes in this are software generated. That was one of the things that really taxed the CPU and caused it to be slower. The envelopes on the actual Prophet-5 are hardware envelopes, and you can feel how different that is in the sound design part of it. It really is a different feel. The resonance and cutoff also sound quite a bit different than they do on the Prophet-5 with the filter. And then on the LFO, I think the LFO on the Prophet-5 is also a hardware LFO, and I'm guessing the LFO here is not hardware. I think it's probably a software LFO as well. It is not, you don't have quite the range with it, and you can't select the multiple waveforms. So I think that the LFO really is a lot different than the Prophet-5 LFO, and I really miss being able to put oscillator B into low frequency mode, turn it into basically a second oscillator, a second LFO, and be able to select multiple wave shapes on the LFO, which allows for some quirky modulating waveforms for the LFO. So I don't think it's a Prophet-5, but for $1,500, it's a lot cheaper than a new Prophet-5 or even more so than a vintage Prophet-5. So I definitely think it is worth it if you want that sequential sound, a vintage sequential sound, but are on a budget. It's still kind of pricey. It's still, apparently they're more reliable than a Prophet-5. The issues that they don't have quite as many issues. And with the Gliggly mod, you get basically a very kind of modernized version of it. Again, I don't think you get that much in my opinion, but I need to install it and then save for sure. So that's my thoughts on the Prophet-600. I think it's a great vintage piece. I was really pleasantly surprised by it. It doesn't really remind me of anything other than a sequential synth. It definitely is the sequential sound. So what are your thoughts below? Please leave your comments. Would love to hear from you and what you think about the Prophet-600. Any details I left out that are of interest, please leave below. And if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications. We'd love to see you here again. And if you want to talk more, come visit us at alamusic.com, and we'll talk to you next time.